The night of our 10th wedding anniversary should have been perfect. The restaurant sparkled with candles, laughter, and champagne as Daniel, my husband, played the role of the charming host. He thrived in that spotlight, telling stories that made everyone laugh a little too loudly. I smiled when expected, held his hand when eyes turned our way, but deep inside there was a hollow space that no amount of fine dining could fill. Across the table sat Ethan, Daniel's best friend since childhood. He wasn't flashy like Daniel. His presence was softer, steadier, his smile slower to appear, yet when it did, it felt like it belonged only to me. That night our eyes met more than once, and I knew he could see through the mask I wore. Later, I slipped outside for air. The city lights stretched endlessly, and when Ethan appeared beside me, it felt like he carried with him every unspoken truth we had both been avoiding. Over the years, there had been little moments. His hand brushing mine as he passed a glass. His voice softening when he asked if I was okay. The way he lingered at the door just a little too long after fixing something in the house. Daniel never noticed. To him, Ethan was more than a friend, he was family. But to me, Ethan was the one person who still made me feel seen. One night, when Daniel didn't come home until dawn, I sat on the couch with tears I couldn't hold back. Ethan arrived quietly, carrying food because he knew I hadn't eaten. He let me lean against him, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. When I finally looked up, the truth was written across his face. He loved me, he always had, and yet, he never said the words. By morning, he was gone before Daniel returned, leaving me torn between comfort and heartbreak. After that, things changed. Ethan became distant, avoiding my eyes, smiling less. At Daniel's birthday party, the last time I saw him, he hugged me briefly, his touch lingering just a second too long. Later in the kitchen, away from the noise, I wanted to speak, to confess everything I had buried inside. But Ethan stopped me. You know I'd do anything for you, for both of you. But this, whatever it is, we can't let it exist. Not here, not now. Tears burned my eyes as I whispered his name, but he shook his head. Don't, because if you say it out loud, I won't be able to walk away. And then he did. He walked out of the kitchen, out of the party, and in many ways, out of my life. Yet even now, I see him in the quiet fragments of memory, in the spaces between my husband's laughter, in the ache of what could never be. The way he looked at me across candlelight, the quiet comfort of his presence on nights when everything felt heavy. Ethan loved me with a loyalty so fierce that instead of betraying his best friend, my husband, he chose to break his own heart. Daniel never knew. He still doesn't. To him, Ethan is simply a friend who got busier with life, someone who drifts in and out with polite excuses. But to me, Ethan is the ghost of a love I'll never speak of. The love that walked away before it could destroy us both. Sometimes, late at night, when Daniel's steady breathing fills the room, I lie awake remembering what it felt like to be seen by him. To be loved in silence, so deeply it almost ruined us both. The months after Ethan left stretched into a blur of days that all felt the same. Daniel remained the man everyone admired, and I remained the wife who stood at his side. But something inside me had cracked, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't repair it. At first, I expected him to return. I imagined him at my door with that quiet smile, holding a bag of food, asking if I had eaten. I thought I would see his name light up on my phone, just to check how I was. But days became weeks, weeks turned into months, and the silence grew heavier. When Daniel mentioned Ethan at dinner, an appointment cancelled, a call unanswered, I nodded casually as if it meant nothing. But inside, I was unraveling. There were nights when I lay awake beside Daniel, replaying every moment I had shared with Ethan. The way his voice softened when he said my name, the way his eyys lingered like he was memorizing me. I told myself he had done the right thing, that our feelings had no place in the world we lived in. But knowing something is right doesn't make it hurt any less. One rainy evening, fate brought us face to face again. I was leaving a cafe, the streets slick with water, when I saw him across the road with his phone pressed to his ear. He hadn't changed, that same quiet strength in the way he carried himself. When our eyes met, time seemed to pause. The rain blurred everything around us, leaving only the weight of our gaze. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he gave me the faintest smile, soft, sad, and filled with everything we couldn't say. He lifted his hand in a small wave, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. I stood frozen, drenched, trembling from more than just the cold. That was the moment I knew. He wasn't coming back into my life, not in the way I wished for. By staying away, Ethan was giving me the gift of protecting my marriage, even as it broke us both. He let me keep the life I had chosen, though it meant losing him forever. The years that followed blurred together. On the surface, Daniel and I carried on, steady, admired, respected. But underneath, nothing was ever as warm as it once had been. Ethan's absence remained a quiet ache, a wound that never fully healed, and a love that will always live in silence. People still called us the perfect couple, and I played my role so well that no one ever questioned it. But beneath the surface, there was always a quiet ache, a reminder of the love I lost before it could ever truly exist. Every now and then, Ethan's name would come up in conversation. Daniel spoke of him with warmth, never suspecting the truth. I would smile, nod, and change the subject, while inside I felt the same pull, the same echo of a man who had loved me so fiercely he chose to walk away rather than ruin me. Sometimes, when the house was still and Daniel slept soundly beside me, I would imagine a different life. A life where Ethan hadn't walked away. A life where I had been brave, or foolish, enough to reach for what I truly wanted. In those moments, I could almost feel his presence, the ghost of his touch. It comforted me and broke me all over again. Even now, after so many years, he lingers at the edges of my mind. The man who never confessed his love. The man I never kissed. The man who left because it was the only way to protect us both. Years passed, and life with Daniel carried on as though nothing had ever been fractured. We hosted dinners, celebrated anniversaries, and traveled to beautiful places that looked flawless in photographs. Friends admired us, envied us even. On the surface, I was the kind of wife any man would be proud to have. But beneath it all, I carried a silence. A shadow that never left me. The shadow of a love I was never allowed to claim. It was during another anniversary celebration that shadow stirred again. The house was filled with laughter and clinking glasses as people congratulated us on another decade of marriage. Daniel stood at my side, his arm around my waist as he gave a heartfelt speech about love, commitment, and partnership. Everyone cheered, and I smiled, but it felt like a mask I couldn't take off. Then, as my eyes drifted across the crowd, I saw him. Ethan. He was there, standing at the back of the room, almost hidden, a glass of wine in his hand. He looked older now, more tired than I remembered, but no less striking. When his eyes met mine, the years between us collapsed in an instant. The ache I thought I had buried came rushing back so hard I had to grip Daniel's arm just to steady myself. Ethan didn't approach. He didn't smile, didn't wave. He simply stood there, watching me with a quiet intensity, as if making sure I was still all right. And then, before the speeches had even ended, he slipped away as silently as he had arrived. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying his face, the way his eyes had softened with something unspoken. I found myself questioning why he came at all. Why leave so quickly? Did he still feel what I felt? Or was it nothing more than a habit, a shadow of a love long gone? Months later, fate would answer those questions. It pushed us back together in a way neither of us could have expected. Daniel had just been promoted, and to celebrate he insisted on hosting a small dinner with a few close friends. Among them was Ethan. My heart nearly gave out when I saw him walk through the door, carrying a bottle of wine and greeting Daniel with the same loyalty he had always shown. When our eyes met, I had to remind myself to breathe. He looked at me the way he always had, as if I were both a comfort and a danger he could never allow himself to touch. Through dinner, we barely spoke, careful not to let our eyes linger too long. The conversation circled around work, success, and memories, but my mind was elsewhere, caught in the silent pull between us. Later, when Daniel excused himself to take a phone call, the air shifted. Ethan and I were left alone in the living room, silence stretching heavy between us. He didn't move closer, didn't break the fragile distance. Instead, he whispered so softly I almost wondered if I had imagined it. "You look happy." It wasn't a question, but it felt like one. I swallowed, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I am," I lied. His jaw tightened, and in that moment, something flickered across his expression, regret, longing, maybe both. But before either of us could say another word, Daniel returned, clapping Ethan on the shoulder and pulling him back into conversation as though nothing had passed between us. That night, after the guests left, I stood alone at the kitchen sink, staring into the darkness outside, my reflection blurred against the glass. My body was there in that house, in that marriage, but my heart was still tangled in a love I was never allowed to claim. Daniel was upstairs, humming to himself as he unpacked gifts. I should have been content. Life had given me stability, a husband who cared, a home others envied. But all I could feel was the echo of Ethan's presence, the weight of words that had never been spoken but still hung between us. In the weeks that followed, I found myself looking for him in quiet, hidden ways. I would drive past places I thought he might go, scan Daniel's calendar for meetings that involved him, and hold my breath whenever his name came up in conversation. Each time I did see him, at dinners, family gatherings, even once by chance in a bookstore, the same war raged inside me. The need to stay loyal to my marriage, and the desperate ache to fall into the arms of the only man who had ever truly seen me. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where I could barely keep my composure, Ethan lingered after everyone else had left. He stayed under the pretense of helping Daniel with something in the garage. When Daniel finally disappeared upstairs, Ethan and I found ourselves alone in the entryway. The silence between us was louder than anything we could have said. "Why do you keep doing this to me?" I whispered, my voice breaking. His eyes closed briefly, as though the question cut him open. "Because walking away once wasn't enough," he said softly. "Because even after all these years, I still—" He stopped, swallowing the words before they could escape, then shook his head. "You're not mine to love." The weight of it shattered something inside me. Tears spilled before I could stop them, and for the first time in all those years, Ethan stepped closer. He didn't touch me. He didn't take me into his arms. He only stepped close enough that I could feel the heat of his presence. His eyes carried a pain so deep it made my chest ache. Then, in a voice almost broken, he whispered, "I walked away to protect you once. Don't make me regret it." And just like always, he left. The moment the door shut behind him, I sank to the floor, sobbing silently into my hands. No matter how much time passed, no matter how many lies I told myself about the life I had chosen, the truth never changed. I belonged to my husband in name, but my heart had always belonged to his best friend. The weeks after that night were unbearable. On the outside, I moved through life as if nothing had shifted. Inside, I was falling apart. Daniel carried on oblivious, wrapped up in his new promotion, new projects, new demands. He seemed proud of us, proud of the life we had built, and that only made my guilt sharper. Every time I looked at him, I wondered how he couldn't see it, the way my eyes lingered when Ethan entered a room, the subtle change in my voice when I spoke his name, the silence that revealed everything I dared not say. Ethan, for his part, seemed to retreat further into the shadows. At dinners, he would sit farther away from me, as though distance could erase the fire that still lived between us. At gatherings, Ethan would slip away early. If our eyes ever met, he would turn his head quickly, as if reminding himself that what burned between us was dangerous, forbidden, untouchable. Yet the more he pulled back, the more I found myself clinging to scraps of him, remembering the shape of his hands, the gravel in his voice, the night years ago when he confessed what I had always known but could never hold on to. It was late autumn when the fragile order of things began to unravel. Daniel had been traveling for work more than usual, leaving me in a quiet house that felt too big, too hollow. One rainy evening, after another rushed phone call where Daniel promised he'd be home soon, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table, trying to convince myself that the loneliness was just part of marriage. Then the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, rain dripping from his jacket, his eyes tired but burning with something I recognized too well. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the storm outside filling the silence between us. He hadn't been to the house in weeks, not since that night in the entryway when everything between us cracked. "I shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low. "Then why are you?" My own voice betrayed me, trembling in the quiet. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might turn and walk back into the storm. But then he shook his head and stepped inside, closing the door behind him. We stood in the dim hallway, so close I could smell the rain on his clothes, feel the heat radiating from him. "I've tried to stay away," he admitted. "I thought distance would help. But every time I see you, it's worse. And every time I don't, it's unbearable." My chest tightened, a sob catching in my throat. "Do you think it's easier for me?" I whispered. "Do you think I don't feel like I'm losing myself every time you walk away?" My voice shook, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Ethan looked at me then with a rawness I had never seen before. His hands hovered at his sides, trembling as though he wanted to touch me but couldn't bring himself to cross that final line. "You're his," he said, his tone sharp, as if he was reminding himself more than me. "You've always been his." Tears welled in my eyes as I shook my head. "Not all of me." When we finally pulled apart, breathless and shaking, reality came crashing back. Ethan ran a hand through his soaked hair, his chest heaving as though he had fought a battle. "This can't happen," he whispered, his voice breaking. "But it already has," I breathed, unable to stop myself. His eyes lingered on me, glassy with pain, as though he were memorizing me one last time. Then, without another word, he opened the door and walked back into the storm. I stood frozen in the hallway, trembling, every nerve still alive with his touch. I knew he was right. What we had done was dangerous, unforgivable. But I also knew that whatever wall we had built over the years had cracked beyond repair. The days that followed were torture. I replayed that kiss again and again, hating myself for it and craving it at the same time. I tried to bury myself in routine, in Daniel's presence when he was home, but nothing erased the way Ethan's lips had felt against mine, or the way his voice broke when he told me it couldn't happen. Weeks later, Daniel invited Ethan over again, completely oblivious to what had passed between us. Ethan came, of course, he always did when Daniel asked. But when our eyes met across the room, I felt it instantly. Something had shifted. The careful restraint that had defined us for years was gone. In its place was quiet surrender, an unspoken acknowledgement that we were already too far gone to ever turn back. And in that moment, I knew with a certainty that terrified me, it was only a matter of time before everything we had tried so hard to deny would come crashing into the light. This story isn't just about forbidden passion, it's about the kind of love that never dies, even when buried beneath years of silence, marriage, and sacrifice. On the surface, she had the perfect life with Daniel, a stable husband, a home that others envied, and a marriage admired by everyone around them. But in the shadows lived a truth she could never erase. Her heart had always belonged to Ethan, Daniel's closest friend. The stormy night when their lips finally met shattered years of restraint. That single kiss exposed what had been hiding in the quiet spaces between them, longing too deep to ignore, and a love too dangerous to claim. Even though Ethan walked away again, the damage was already done. The walls they had built had cracked, and nothing could rebuild them the same way. Now, every glance, every stolen moment, carries the weight of everything unspoken. They both know it's only a matter of time before the truth crashes into the light, threatening to destroy the life they've both worked so hard to protect. Some loves never fade. They hide, they wait, and sometimes, they return when you least expect them, leaving you with a choice that could change everything. This story is a dramatized narrative created for entertainment and awareness purposes. Any resemblance to real names, people, or events is purely coincidental. The goal is to explore the emotions, struggles, and lessons of infidelity and relationships in a way that sparks reflection and conversation. Some loves can never be spoken, yet they live forever in the silence of our hearts. If this story touched you, don't just leave quietly, share your thoughts below. Thought balloon. Hit like if you felt the pain of hidden love. Tap subscribe for more true infidelity stories, forbidden love confessions, and emotional betrayals. And don't forget to turn on the bell so you never miss the next chapter of passion, pain, and truth. Your support keeps these untold stories alive, and every click helps more readers discover the truth behind closed doors.